Welcome everyone back to Intelligent Voices Israelites. Today we have a great study that's going to be talking about, and as many of you maybe have already read the timeline and time for the topic, you see exactly this is going to be a very deep one. So I am your brother YISRAEL-YE'SHOMBIYAH. Today I will be reading and also using logic and precepts, and it will be talking about old time, or this Old Testament that everyone knows. And here it is, the timeline and the events that took place, that many times many have gotten the information of years wrong. So what we're going to do is try to cover a little or mostly all of it today if we have the time. And this is Mountain Time. I'm starting here at 1:35. So I'd like to give everyone an opportunity to get everything they need if they need to. And we're going to get into the study. Now, let me grab my... all right. I got my logic notes here. Let's cut that off. Reading out the big book. So everyone, let's get into prayer. Almighty Father YAHUAH, we thank you so much, Father, for the spirit that is upon all of us, brothers and sisters, guiding us in the way of life, to know that we have been granted the crown of eternal life, thanking us, Father, and blessing us at the same time through the Son's blood and sacrifice, keeping them steadfast in the word, and making sure that all understand that your return is almost near, and this wicked world is coming to an end, and all of the things that is within it. So, Father, as we start today into this topic, Old Testament timeline, which will help many brothers and sisters see and understand the truth about many things and events. As we continue, Father, may the Spirit of you guide us through. In Shalom, Yeshua's name. Amen. So, brothers and sisters, let's look at the Old Testament timeline, because many times we see about the events in the Bible, and many have mathematical miscalculated timelines and events. So I felt it necessary through the Spirit of Yeshua that here it is that it was being called upon to bring forth this this message here, which we'll be talking about many factors. So take your pen or your notepads wherever you may to take notes for, because it's going to show us how many have miscalculated the times of 400 years, the times of our people who were basically in bondage in many situations. And we have seen that over and over the generations. So now let's get into this Old Testament timeline, lineage, because it's going to show you a lot of details of errors, as many have seen it through the ages, and Father have allowed us to share this logical proof that's also going to be probably, hopefully, soon be a part of the book that will be done. And you'll be able to see the timetables and everything like that. Basically what I'm going to be actually talking briefly about today, which you'll be able to find in my book, YISRAEL-YE'SHOMBIYAH, The Crying of Israel. So let's get into this. Now, we're going to be talking about, for number one, we're going to be looking at the age of Terah and Abraham, and we're going to be looking at the the time periods, everyone, of when the children of Israel was enslaved in Egypt. And then we also going to be also talking briefly about the time period of which the judges led Israel. So this is going to be basically like a mixed salad bowl. And it's going to give you a lot of understanding of the Old Testament and its timeline. And it's going to help come forth the chronological order of the period. And like I said, it's going to be in my book. Hopefully I'll be done and get it done before the other turning events. But the Cry of Israel, I'm going to share this Old Testament timeline, which is basically in the book, but it goes even deeper than what we're going to discuss here today. So for a special day here of this video will be a very delight, hopefully, for your understanding of how many miscalculated how and when time and events took place. So many going to have the encyclopedia and many other books, as you heavy researchers may well do, to make sure that what you're getting just a piece of basically help you go deeper into the search of Terah, Abraham, and the children of Israel of when they was in bondage in Egypt. And then we're going to actually go forward with share from my book also the judges and their time frame of when they led Israel. So let's get into it. So with that, let's start, everybody. Let's look at the birth of Abraham, because many times over, brothers and sisters have gotten that wrong, about the events and the time and the birth of Abraham. So hopefully I'm going to break this down by sharing a little bit of this information. Now, the birth of Abraham and whether Terah was 70 years old or 130 years old when his son, who later was renamed Abraham, right, was born. Now, we're going to look at the birth of Abraham and see that Terah was 130 years old at the birth of Abraham, like many have said that he was 70 years old, right? So I'm going to share the wisdom that was given to me by YAHUAH, YAHUAH. As we must look at Acts. Let's go to Acts chapter 7, verse 4. Because I want to come back to a table that I had to print there from the book. So now let's go to Acts chapter 7, verse 4. Says, then came he, Abraham, out of the land of the what? Chaldeans, right? This is Babylon, ancient Babylon, right? And dwelt in Charan or Haran. You can spell it with an H, or you can spell it Charran, Charan, from the Greek, or Now he says came from Haran, and from there, when his father was dead, he removed him into this land where you now dwell. Consider also now. So now realize now, let's go back to Acts. Let me read this here in this book tense. Because we're talking about the Old Testament timeline, but we're going to start off with Abraham to see that many have gotten information of pattern of time and events. Now here in verse 7, verse 4, what do it say? Again, so when he went forth from the land of the Chaldeans and settled in Haran, and from there, after his father died, right? So that means Terah, okay? He made him migrate to the land where you now dwell, right? So now we see that, right? Now go to Genesis chapter 11:32, everybody. Watch this. Because keep up, we are talking, before we get deep into the Old Testament timeline, we got to look at the people of that time, right? So we must start with the leader of the Israelites. So here it is, of the nation, the leader of the nations. Now look at verse 11. Now here in this other book, as I read, it says, in the days of Terah were 205 years, right? 205 years. And Terah died in Haran. Now we just read he moved his father now, right? Who now was told to leave the land, right? So now we're looking at the Old Testament timelines, right? And now in verse 32, what do you get? You see, he says, the lifetime of Terah was 205 years. Then Terah died in Haran, right? Now let's go to and look at Genesis 4. As we see that Abram was 75 years old when he had departed out of Haran, right? So that's now when we go to 12, verse 4, Abram went as the Almighty directed him. Now this is Genesis 12, verse 4. And Lot went with him, right? Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran, right there. So keep all that in mind, everyone, because we're going to be doing some math in a minute, because everybody keeps saying 400 years and all of this, right? But we're going to break it down to the compound. And here it is. We're going to allow you to see exactly what is really going on by miscalculations, right? And misinformation seen to be miscalculating a lot of brothers and sisters. Now, understand this. 205 years, okay? Right? And now as we see, Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. Now, understand, subtracting 75 from 205, everybody. Subtracting, here it is, 75 from 205 leaves what? 130, right? So therefore, for Terah's age at birth of Abraham, that's his dad. So he was 130 years old at the birth of Abraham, right? Now, this is the strongest reason for the view that Terah was 130 years old when Abraham, like I said, was born, right? Now, understand, we're proving, we're talking about Old Testament timeline, the events, and the people that lived in that event, and proving how mathematicals moved with the generations, and how man and woman have today been thrown off about the time of their events. And that means that if you are thrown off about this particular beginning, then you are totally, completely off by the ending, which is already, here it is. If many of our archives videos you can go to, everyone, for you new who are basically here or found IVI, to check out our archives, view all the video, get caught up. Then you'll see what Yah is revealing to you. Then you'll put the puzzle all together, right? Like Neo in the Matrix, okay? He had to send Morpheus first, then through Trinity, right? So now I understand we're seeing that this is starting with Abraham. Now, go to Acts chapter 7. Now, we'll go to Acts chapter 7, verse 4. Chapter 7, verse 4. And when you get there, watch this. It says, then came he, Abram, out of the land of the Chaldeans, that's ancient Babylon, and dwelt in Sharan, which is Haran. And from there, when his parent, earth parent, male parent, was dead, he removed him into this land. You see that? He removed him into this land where you are now dwell. Now, as I amplify it and read it again here in the Amplify, clearly says, so when he went forth from the land, it is, of the Chaldeans and settled in Haran, and from there, after his male parent died, he made him migrate, it is, to this land where you now dwell. So now you see how Abraham was being pushed along, right? In this Old Testament timeline, okay? Keeping in mind, 75 subtract from 205 leaves 130. So his so-called, his dad was 130 years old when he had or begotten Abraham. Keep that in mind, everybody, okay? And here it is showing strong reason why we're viewing this mathematics, because here it is, man have been thrown off. When is the end of time? When is the end of days? So you must get to the beginning so you can catch up to your ending, right? So just stay there, brothers and sisters. So now we done discovered when Abraham was begotten by Terah. And here it is, we're seeing that clearly as we continue now and have read in what's that, Acts chapter 7, verse 4. And now as we see, let's in Genesis chapter 12, 4. And now let's look at a secondary support. Genesis chapter 11. Let's go to Genesis chapter 11. Watch this. Okay. Verse 32. The lifetime, right, of Terah was 205 years. See that? The lifetime, his whole lifetime, was 205 years. Okay. And then Terah died in Haran. Right? We see that? Now, as we see this, Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And now we done did the subtraction. And now this records the death of Terah. But Abraham leaving to Haran is not recorded, everybody, until a few years later. That's right. It's not recorded. That is not recorded to a few years later, which, as we've seen in Genesis verse 12, verse 4, right? 12, verse 4. Abram went as the Almighty directed him. You see that? And Lot went with him. Abram was but 75 years old. Remember, we just read it? When he left Haran, right? So if one assumes the events were recorded in chronological order, that would mean that Terah was 130 at the birth of Abraham, right? And we know that one cannot always, right, assume the scriptures as or recorded in chronological order, right? And we know that most of the events in the Bible are chronological, but sometimes YAHUAH, we know, records events in different order. That's right. Many of you didn't know that, did you? So this will be in my book. So now realize we must look at Genesis chapter 35. Watch this. Genesis 35. And we're going to look at verse 27 through 29. Right? Because watch. As we see here, events in a different order. Because this is why we're here in Genesis 35, 27 through 29. As it records the death of Isaac, which happened when Jacob was 120 years old, right? So now understand, Jacob went home to his father Isaac at Meribah, and now, which is called Hebron, where Abram and Isaac had resided. The length of Isaac's life was 180 years. 180 years. Then he breathed his last. He died as an old man, right? And was gathered to his people, right? After a full life, his son Esau, here it is, his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. You see that? So now here it is. You got two nations who was against each other, but two nations who came back, buried them, right? So now this is showing you that the Old Testament timeline and the events, man have purposely thrown them all off for you. And here it is to make you not understand what time you're in, right? So this is why we have to go to the beginning to show, starting with what? Abram, who became Abraham. And we have did the math, 75 by what? Subtracting 205 leaves 130 for Terah. And now as we have seen that Isaac died at 120 years old, and when Jacob was 120 years old, right? As we see, he took and buried his dad Isaac with Esau. So now keep in mind, everyone, the story begins when Joseph is only 17. This was 12 years before Isaac died. So there's a 12-year gap, right? When Jacob was 108 years old, right? So why did YAHUAH choose to record the death, here it is, of Isaac earlier, as you just read? See? Because here it is. He recorded the death of Isaac earlier. Perhaps he did it, here it is, to keep it from showing up in the middle of the story of Joseph, right? Because you remember Joseph was sold, right? And here it is, being a distraction from the subject at hand, which we're talking about the Old Testament timeline. He didn't want no one to get thrown off. But eventually, the scriptures of man, who therefore put them together, actually missed a lot of things in error of the mathematicals of the time. This is what we're talking about. It's getting you to see how thrown off you might be, right? Because here it is, you starting with Abraham, which making it to the simplest math. We ain't going Enoch and the prophet and and on and on. Watch what happens here now, right? So now as you see with your eyes, let me take this out of here. It clearly says when Jacob was 108, right? So now, likewise, perhaps YAHUAH was telling of Terah's death, right? Before getting into the story of Abraham. See? Wherever YAHUAH's reason-worthy events in the Bible are not always recorded, as we know, brothers and sisters, in the precise order in which they took place. So now this is why we're having this study or this discussion about the Old Testament timeline and the events in it, because here it is, it's going to allow you to see and understand how much time you don't have, but see the times that here it is that you didn't understand, that therefore now you're able to get an understanding before it's too late. Now, another weak point is that since Nahor married the daughter of Haran, remember? Because as we go to Genesis chapter 11, let's look at verses 29. Abram and Nahor, it is, took wives. The names of Abram's wife was Sarah or Sarah. See that? With an I. And the name of Nahor's wife was Melchai, daughter of Haran, the earth male parent of Melchai and Isaac. So now here it is. Sarah was barren. She had no child. And that's going to be very important in this lesson, because you're going to see we're talking about the Old Testament of time, getting the information about the ages of the men who bear seed to the women. And here it is, as we know, at the Garden of Adam and Eve, Yah took life where they lived forever, if they wouldn't have sinned. But now here it is, we're looking at the time frame and the age and seeing that now this is, of course, here it is, far from conclusive, right? Since Nahor may have simply married a woman 20 or to 30 years younger than himself. Then this often happens today, right? We see it in modern day times in certain other countries. But it would have been much more common in the days when lifespan were around 200 years, right? Now understand, everyone, brothers and sisters, the view that Terah was 70 years old at the birth of Abraham. As many have said. But what we have did the math to see is that 130 years at the birth. So this is the debate, right? This determination is more direct, right? Because we must go to Genesis. Let's look at Genesis chapter 11, verse, 26 now. When Terah was 70 years old, he begot, it says, Abram, right? Nahor and Haran. So now keep that in mind, right? Some assume that Haran must have been much older than Nahor and Abram. This is, of course, far from conclusive, right? Since Nahor may have simply married a, like I said, 20-year-old to 30-year-old younger woman, younger than himself. Now understand that Terah lived 70 years and begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Okay? And a little less direct, but perhaps even stronger support is the miraculous nature of the birth of Isaac, right? Which starts in Genesis. Let's go to Genesis. 17:17. So when you get to 17:17, it says, Abram fell face down and laughed as he said to himself, right? Can a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Can Sarah give birth at 90? So now you see this? When Yah told Abram that he will have a child at the age of 100, Abram, what did he do? Fall face up and laughed and said in his own heart, shall a child be born unto him? That is, from a man that is 100 years old. So now as we see this is Genesis. And now 17:17. Now look at 18:11. 18:11 says, 18 verse 11. Now Abram and Sarah were old, advanced in years, and Sarah had stopped having her menstrual period. You see this? Her menstrual period. Verse 12. So Sarah laughed to herself. Didn't her husband do it too? And said, now that I am worn out and my husband is old, am I still able to have sexual pleasure? You see that? Or bring forth a fruit? So now we see this is clearly that Abram and Sarah didn't think that they can have children due to the old age, that they were stricken in their age, right? But now when we go a little closer, let's look at Hebrews chapter 11. So it's giving you a deeper look inside of the Old Testament in the people and the way they thought and how it's parallel it is with everyone in every generation, right? So now look at Hebrews chapter 11, and it says here in this book, through faith also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed and was delivered. You see that? They thought they couldn't because they were so old, right? Delivered of a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful. Here it is. Who therefore made the promise. Therefore sprung there even a one in him, Abraham, as a good as dead. So now here it is. Let's look at that 17 though. So I don't want to go on because I'm reading notes from my book here. And here it is. He says, go back there. That was 11. And 11, Hebrews. By faith, he received power to generate, right? So now when you go to Hebrews 11:11, what do we see? It says, by faith, he received power to generate, even though he was past the normal age and Sarah herself was sterile. For he thought that the one who had made the promise was trustworthy. So it was that there came forth from one man himself as good as dead. There you go. That's saying descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sands of the sea. So now we're seeing clearly this was given unto Abraham, right? And now we're seeing the fulfillment of this Old Testament timeline and the age differences. And here it is. It is allowing you to see the that here it is, they held on to the promise. This is what allowed them to conceive, right? Now, as good as did in effect, no man born after the global flood is said to have fathered, or here it is, parented a child from when they was 100 or more years old after the flood. No one, right? So now here it is, with Abraham being the only exception, this is strong support for Terah being 70 years old at birth of Abraham rather than being 130 years old. See that? Because we're looking at the time periods, how man lived, right? From the 200 and now here it is, but short. We know that when YAHUAH originally gave his word to those who wrote the scriptures in the original manuscript, now this is all in my book, Cries of Israel, YAHUAH did not make any errors. If properly copied, translated, and understood, right, the Hebrew Bible has no contradictions. However, based upon what we know today, I can see how a reasonable Bible student, here it is, could come to either conclusion that Terah was 70 or 130 years old. But understand me now, the number in the table that will be in my book will break down the history from the beginning all the way down to the ending, okay, of the lineage, even through Abraham as well, right? So now here is another thought. If Terah was actually 130 years old at birth of Abraham, then all of the years for the previous events, here it is, would shift backwards, everybody, my brothers and sisters. And here it is, backwards in times of 60 years. That's right. 60 years would have to be taken off time, right? That will put the creation at 410 BC, before Common Era, instead of 3950 BC, before Common Era. Now, understand, students encouraged, here it is, as we always say here at IVI, Intelligent Voices Israelites, you're always encouraged to do your research, okay, of the scriptures to see whether the words of any teacher is correct. So now understand me now. As we continue, your brother YISRAEL-YE'SHOMBIYAH, this is the breaking down of the Old Testament timeline. But here it is, with time comes those who are in that time, and with the moving of time. See, that goes into science and all of that. I don't get into a lot of that because a lot of the scientological people, they believe in a different science. So you have to see that here it is, the science that comes from the Bible is allowing you to see clearly time and math have been miscalculated. Now I'm finna get to the time of those who were in Egypt in slavery, all right, at the time of Moses. So now one common misunderstanding of biblical chronological is that the thinking that the children of Israel were slaves in Egypt for 400 years, right? Everyone always say 400 years. In actuality, the time was much shorter, and I'm going to prove that. Now realize the belief that the children of Israel were slaves in Egypt for 400 years is largely based upon, here there's two verses. And these two verses usually comes about as and he said unto Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger, it says, in a land that is not theirs, right? And YAHUAH spoke on this wise, that his seed shall be, here it is, living in a strange land, right? And here it is, and they shall be, or shall bring, or be brought into bondage, right? And entreated badly, all of them, evil, for 400 years, as it says in the book of Acts, as you may see in chapter 7, verse 6. Then there is this passage in Exodus, everyone. As we are in Exodus, go to Exodus chapter 12, verse 40, 41. So now as we have seen, Genesis 15, 13 is allowing the affliction for 400 years. And then we're seeing Genesis 15 through 13 exact as he spoke to them that the seed, here it is, of your seed shall be in a foreign or strange land, right? Then we come to Acts chapter 7 verse 6. Let's all go there. All right, here we go. Excuse me. Now, chapter 7, verse 6 clearly allows us to see that up top, there we go. Clearly shows us here, and Yah said this, his descendants shall be what? Foreigners in a land not their own. Whose? Isaac's descendants, right? So where they shall be what? Enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. So now you see that it says that in Acts chapter 7, right? Verse 6. And then now the relocation of those Israelites or those children of Israel who dwelt in Egypt also was 430 years. So we got 400 years, and then now we got 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of the 430 years, even the same day it came to pass, right, that all of the Most High, YAHUAH, here it is, Israelites, went out from the land of Egypt, because we know of Moses. Let's go to verse Exodus chapter 12, right? Chapter 12. Oops, bring my book up here. So we see Exodus chapter 12. Look at verse 40 and 41, right? It clearly says, and it states for us, the time of the Israelites which they had stayed in Egypt, was 430 years in Egypt. In Egypt. Not saying just in bondage, but just in Egypt. All right? Because here it is. It says, and at the end of the 430 years, on this very date, all the Israelites of the Almighty left the land of Egypt, right? To where? Ancient Babylon, Ekron, okay? So now in verse 42, you can go on and on. So now, this does not mean that the children of Israel dwelt in Egypt for 430 years, though. Because here it is, we got to keep in mind we're doing the math to the timeline of the ancient testament, okay, about what was said, and we're also doing the math, right, which we did a little some earlier, and we're going to do some more. But understand, realize that here it is, the children of Israel, here it is, it has never meant that they dwelt in Egypt for 430 years. As we see, they left. Now, Paul explains that the 430 years, right, extends, here it is, from the time of Yahuwah's covenant with Abraham, right? Because you got to start there, right? Because Isaac, right? Now he says with the covenant with Abraham until, right? the children of Israel left. Now, let me say that again. Paul explains that the 400 years extended, here it is, from the time of the covenant with Abraham all the way until the children of Israel left Egypt. What do we say? In this I say, that the covenant that was confirmed before Yahuwah and Yahweh, that the law, which was 430 years after, cannot be disannulled, that it should make the promise of the non-effect. Here it is. It would make the promise of non-effect. Watch this, Galatians chapter 3, verse 17. Galatians 3, brothers and sisters. Verse 17 clearly allow you to see. Starts right here. This is what I mean. The law which came 430 years afterwards. See that? Afterwards does not annul the law that came afterwards. See that? So that means here it is, brothers and sisters. Many have been thrown off of time by the Old Testament timeline to know when the end, and here it is coming. But here it is, have not lined themselves up with the understanding of mathematical errors, because it is allowing you to see that you must have the beginning down to understand when the time of the ending is coming, right? So now he says, not annul a covenant. It does not annul a covenant previously ratified or put in order by Yahuwah so as to cancel the promise. See, the promise is still through Abraham and his seed who came from him and his seeds. See that? So now we're seeing clearly. We know that Jacob and his family entered Egypt 215 years, right? And we can see the timeline. After Yahuwah's promise to Abraham in Genesis, as we must go, chapter 12, 1 through 7. Watch this, brothers and sisters. See, it's showing you how man have miscalculated time and how they have only tried to see it in chronological order, when here it is, when Yahuwah the Father wrote in the Ancient of Days of Old Testament times to the men and women of that time. This is how it was seen. Now here it is, Genesis 12, 1 through 7 clearly allows you to see that Jacob and his family entered and was there for 215 years. The Almighty said to Abram, go forth from your land, your relatives, and from your male parents' house to the land that I will show you. I will make, here it is, of you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. All the families of the earth, families mean nations, brothers and sisters, will find blessings in you, he says, right? So now, continue. Abram went as the Almighty directed him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. Abram took his wife, Sarah, his brother's son's Lot, all of his possessions that had accumulated, in the persons that had acquired in Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan. See that? Going into one of the land of the ancient Babylons of Ekron that sits on the Euphrates River. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land as far as the sacred place of Shishim, by the oak of Moreh, the Canaanites were then in the land, right? The Almighty One, YAHUAH, appeared to Abram and said to your descendants, I will give this land. So Abram built an altar there to the Almighty Yahweh, who he had appeared to him. So right there. So now this is clearly getting to the math and allowing us to see Jacob and his family entered Egypt 250 years. YAHUAH, that extended the promise in Genesis. Here it is, 12 through 7. This was halfway, everyone, through the 430 years. And here it is. And furthermost, allow us to know that Joseph, here it is, was 39 at the time and lived 70 more years to the age of 110, as we know from Exodus. We know that the Israelites or Israel did not become slaves in Egypt until, here it is, clearly after Joseph died. Now, I'm going to stop there because we must go back and read that and see clearly that what I just read from a book, that here it is, Cries of Israel will be hopefully be finished soon, but I'm sharing a piece of this book to show you exactly how the mathematical order have been basically out of order, and many have been thrown off about the time and events of the Genesis in the beginning, with now leading with Abraham, just from that basic, because here it is, it's going to get you caught up to therefore how far off time for the tribulation and everything. So therefore, once you view our archives, our videos, everything's going to match. Yeah, Father's showing you puzzle pieces that's put together, which show you very clarity. So therefore, you can understand that this is giving you wisdom to realize the timing and the events of Abraham. But not only that, getting you more information on how much one might have been miscalculated. So now we see that Joseph was 110, right? And he died, and all his brothers and all that generation. And the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly still and multiplied, right, brothers and sisters? And here it is, exceedingly mightily, in the land, here it is, was filled with them, as the word says, as we know in Exodus chapter 1. This was Egypt. This was at the time of Egypt, because as we've seen, they went to Canaan, and when Joseph was born, he became sold. We know that story, and that's how they came back out of Canaan and went back into Egypt, right? And we see this here in Exodus chapter 1. Let's read it. So we're still working with that time, right? Seeing this time frames, how things have been off the time and how many have not learned about this. But here it is, you seeing it today in verse 6 to 8 verse. Now Joseph and all his brothers in the whole generation died. That generation died, right? But the Israelites were fruitful and prolific. They multiplied and became so very numerous that the land was what? Filled with them. Verse 8, the new king who knew nothing of Joseph, it is, rose to power in where? Egypt. So now you see, and this is clear information, brothers and sisters. But now subtracting 71, we're finna do some new math now because we just did some earlier. So now we're finna subtract 71 from 215. Subtract 71 from 215. Let me grab more water. Be right back. Give y'all opportunity to do that. So what do we come up with, my brothers and sisters? We come up with what? 144, right? And yes, we'll come up and it will leave you with 144 what? Years. Because we're still talking about 430, breaking it up to see you where they were, and they wasn't just in Egypt for the whole 430 years. So now as we see, that leaves 144 years, the maximum time that Israel would have been enslaved in Egypt. So you keep that number written down, everybody, 144 years, the time that Israel was in Egypt. The fact that the children of Israel were only in Egypt for 215 years is also consistent with the genealogic of Moses, right? Born 80 years before the Exodus. He was born 80 years before, it is, the Exodus from Egypt. Keep that in mind. Moses was the son of Amram, the son of Huth, the son of Levi. Because here it is. Let's go to First Chronicles, chapter verse 6. And look at 1 through 3, and it'll show you the lineage. See, then I tell you that if y'all have read the topic title to this lesson today, you will see that we will be talking about also pointing to lineage as we're talking about the Old Testament timeline. The sons of Levi were Gershon, Kohath, Merari, the son of Gershon, and you see the sons of Kohath were Amram, right? Kohath were Amram, Hebron. So now we've seen that. Now this is the area of basically seeing the lineage, 1 through 3. And of course, Levi, right, was one of Jacob's 12 sons, right? And we also understand that in Genesis 46, 8 through 11, that Kohath, the grandfather of Moses, was already born when Jacob and his family entered Egypt. Kohath lived to be 133, right? And his son Amram lived to be 137, as we see in Exodus 6, 18 through 20. Now, even if Kohath was only years old when they, here it is, entered Egypt, and Aram and Moses each were born in the last year of their earth parent lives, then the maximum time, everybody, in Egypt could have only been 133 plus 137 plus 80. Remember I told y'all to write all of this down? Because here it is, we're going to be doing math. So now when you get the maximum time in Egypt, we got the 144, right? The maximum time that Israel would have been enslaved. That was the period of enslavement in Egypt. Then we got the period of that when they went to Canaan, right? And then here it is, they had to come back to Egypt. So we got 133 for Kohath lifespan, right? We got 137 for the son Amram lived. Here it is. Plus 80, right? Which equals out to what? 350 years. We're still short of the traditional 400, right? So now for the 44 and then that, now adding that together, we see 350. And then now actually based on 215, which we took earlier, which subtracting 71 from 215 leaves 144. Remember, I told y'all to write that down. Now understand, actually now we see that 215 year period, Amram and Moses were probably born, right? Somewhere when their earth parent, here it is, male parent, had to been around 70 years old, which was quite difficult for that time in history, right? So now realize, what about the 400 years of servitude prophesied in Genesis 15, though? Let's go there. This is how we find that out. Go to Genesis 15, verse 13. And when you get down here, then the Almighty YAHUAH said to Abram, know for certain, right, that your descendants will reside in a foreign land, not their own, where they shall be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years, right? Now, perhaps this number is meant to be calculated over Israel's history instead of the other way around. The sixth servitude during the time of Judges, which totaled 111 years, and Babylon servitude, which was 70 years, right? We're still doing math, brothers and sisters. If the entire 215 years in Egypt were counted, then the total would become 396 years, right? This may or may not be 400 years to which YAHUAH was referring. Perhaps the 400 years is meant to include the time in which Isaac, right, and Jacob were strangers in the land of Canaan before Israel went to Egypt. See? So now this is why this in my book is going to break down even more. Because here it is, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Because here it is, it's getting you to the math so you can understand how to see the time and turning of events. Here it is. And when the children of Israel were, and how long were they in Israel, in Egypt, and Canaan. And here it is, ancient Babylon. All around, right? Now, whichever the case, all of YAHUAH's prophecies either have been or will be fulfilled. Now, understand me. The period of the judges, we must look at, because now we're starting to see the ancient testament comes together by math, because here it is by calculations. Now, when we go to 1 Kings, we're talking now about the period of the judges, because here it is, this is still Israel, all right? And it's telling you now the time frame of the timeline of Israel being in any location and where they were and how long they were, right? So, must got a marker in the way, yeah. All right, now 2 Kings here. No, 1 Kings chapter 6. And I have another Bible I'm going to read it from as well, but I'm going to amplify it. So now it says, and it came to pass in 480 years after the children of Israel were out of the land of Egypt. You see this? So we're doing our math of how long, right? And then it says, in the 4th year of Solomon's reign over Israel. in Mount Shif, which is the second month, okay, that he began to build the house of the Almighty, which is April. So we know that 480 years elapsed between the Exodus and from Egypt, right, everyone? In the year that King Solomon began building the first temple, in the fourth year of his reign, because we're seeing here in First Kings, and it's proven that Israel wasn't in Egypt 430 years. So now as we look here in this 1 through verse 1, it says, in the 480th year after the Israelites went forth from the land of Egypt, in the fourth year, there we go again, of Solomon reign over Israel, in the month of Shif, the second month, he began to build the house of the Almighty YAHUAH. So now as we see that, this is where we get math. So we know that 480 years elapsed, right, between the Exodus and from the time of Egypt, in the year that King Solomon began to build the first temple, in the fourth year of his reign, right? When we subtract, now understand, subtract 40 years in which Israel wandered in the wilderness, the 30 years that YAHUAH was alive in the land of Israel prior to the judges, King Saul and King David's reign of 40 years. So write all that down, everybody. Give y'all a minute. So now David reigned for 40 years each, right? In the first 4 years of Solomon's reign, we are left with 326 years. Okay? 326 years in which Israel was led by judges. So this is the time of the judges being led, right? And I know y'all done wrote down the math for 350 for the time of when Moses and the time of the Exodus. We did that math, right? So now, some have had difficulties reconciling this with the words of Apostle Paul. Now, this was recorded also in Luke, but we're going to read it in Acts chapter 13. Go to Acts chapter 13, 17, and 20, right? It clearly says, YAHUAH of this people, Israelites, chose our ancestors and exalted the people during their, here it is, locating in the land of Egypt. With uplifted arms, he led them out of it. And here it is, it says, and for about 400 years, or not 40 years, he put up with them in the desert when he had destroyed 7 nations. Now, understand, in the land of Canaan, this ancient Babylon where Abram came out of, remember? He gave them their land as an inheritance, right? And at the end of about 430 years, almost at the end, about 4, then I just give you the math, 326 years in which Israel was led by judges. And now at the end of about 450 years, he says, after these things, he provided judges up to Samuel, the prophet. Right there, my brothers and sisters. So now this was Paul preaching in Antioch. And Paul has said that to them and allowed them to know, here it is, Yah is the one and the planner behind all things, right? And here it is, his math is always right. And he says, clearly, the land of Chaldeans, he divided their land to them by lot. And after that, he gave unto them judges, there you go, about the space, here it is, about the time of 400, here it is, for 450 years, which is at the time of Samuel, the prophet, right? Now, the King James translates this passage as the judges ruling for about 450 years. From the Greek text, however, this passage can be understood to mean that from the calling of Israel, here it is, Abraham, the leader of nations, to the beginning of the period of judges was about 450 years. Most English versions translate, for example, the New American Standard Version translates it, as we can read it here in Acts 13, as we just read. The Greek, and here it is, it says, Yah of his people of Israel chose our fathers and made the people great during their stay in the land of Egypt, and with an uplifted arm, he led them out from it, and for a period of about 400 years, or not 40 years, he put up with them in the wilderness. And when he had destroyed 7 nations in the land of Canaan, he distributed their land as an inherited, as which he took about 450 years, which took about 450 years. And after these things, he gave them judges. So now we understand, brothers and sisters, math had to be corrected, because now we understand that the Old Testament is showing us how to do the math to catch up to the New Testament and the Third Testament of James. Because here it is, James is basically included into the New Testament. So here it is, we just seen that the Old Testament have not been annulled as well as the New Testament, because it's one book. So here it is, we're seeing time and information of how far have we come to the tribulation. How far at the knock at the door, where are you? And here it is, as you look in our archives, you will find out now matching this information from the beginning catches you up to the time, brothers and sisters. So let me read. So it was not the time of the judges that covered about 450 years, but it was the period between Yahuwah's choosing of Israel's, here it is, divine, here it is, faithful fathers, to the dividing of the land that took up to about 450 years. Chronologically, this would be correct. By the calculations recorded in the tables above, as you will see in this book, from the dividing of the line of Israel back to the call of Abraham was 475 years, which is about 450. Also, from the dividing of the land of Israel back to the birth of Isaac, which was 450 years. From the time of Joshua's death, which was 1426 before Common Era, right, to the monarch established at the beginning of the reign of King Saul, which was 700 BC. Israel ruled by 14 different judges by that time, and was also forced in servitude 6 times. And then the 14 judges, as we seen, Nathan, Ehud, Shamhagar, Deborah, Gideon, And as you will read in those. And now as we see the total years of all judges and all of the servitude adds up to a considerable, here it is, number, more than 326 years. If one doesn't consider the overlapping which took place. 326 years, everybody. However, we know that some of the leaderships of the judges overlap some of the servitudes. Now, for example, we know from Judges, we must go to Judges 4, verse 3 and 4. Look at Judges. Let's go in that book. Let's go in there. So 4, 3 and 4, what do you see? It clearly says, at that time, brothers and sisters, at that time, the prophet, Deborah, the wife, and here it is, Lampinda, was judging Israel. So now she used to sit under Deborah palm tree. And now you can see all of this is the information as we are seeing and showing that for 20 years of the time of Deborah judged Israel, Israel was in servitude to the Canaanites. And we know from Judges 13 and 1 and Judges 16, 30 through 31, that during that 20 years that Samson judged, Israel was in servitude to the Philistines, as we all know, right? Also, some of the leaders, right, of some of the judges may have overlapped each other for their time and events, as they may have judged over separate geographical areas of Israel at that time, brothers and sisters. Now realize there is not enough information to piece together all of the details of just when each judge led and when each servitude took place with much certainty, right? But we know we can be certain that the total time of judges was about 326 years from about 1426 BCE to 1100 BC. So now this is only allowing us to see, brothers and sisters, that we must look at the Old Testament in a timeline, because the timeline have to line up, because we know Abram leaves Haran in the year of what was that 2001 BC, and then for the next event came 75 years later, as we can see in Genesis 12:4. And let me just walk y'all down what you was find out in the book, because here it is, my book, Cry of Israel. It's not ready to drop yet, and but there's information in the book and much more. Now, when we look at the creation of time, year of events, right? You got 3950 BC, and then years into a next event, which will take which was, as we just looked, 130 years, right? Genesis 5:3, which would bring the birth of Seth. So now years from creation was 130 years, which the event of 3820 BC, before Common Era. So every time you hear me say BC, I'm saying before Common Era. So now we see the birth of Seth. And then there was 105 years until the next event, which was Genesis 5:6, to the birth of Enosh. So when we get to Enosh, we get, for the year of creation, 235, and the year of the event of Enosh was 3715 BC, before Common Era. And then 90 years, here it is, but until the next event, which was in Genesis 5:9. which is the birth of Cain, right? Cana. And when we see that in the year of event was 3625 BC, we don't get anything until 70 years until the next event, which will take place in Genesis 5:12, right? Genesis 5:12 give us the birth of Mahalalel. So now we see Mahalalel in 335 BC into the next event, 65 years into it, which will put us in Genesis 5:15. Will give us the birth of Jared. So now we got the birth of Jared in 3490 BC until the next event, which will be 162 years into the next event, which will put us in Genesis 5:18, which give us the birth of Enoch. So now we got the birth of Enoch in 3328 BC, which now give us 65 years into the next event, which is Genesis 5:21, right, brothers? So now when we see this here, birth of Mahalalel. So we Mahalalel. So what we see here in 3263 BC, 187 years until the next event, which pushes us to Genesis, verse 25, the birth of Lamech or Lamech. So now here it is. That's Noah's daddy, right? 37 BCE, and then 182 years into the next event, which is Genesis 5:28, which is the birth of Noah, like I said, 2894 BC, which is 600 years until the next event in Genesis chapter 7, verse 6, which brings us right to the beginning of the flood, right? And then the year of event 2294 BC, before Common Era, we got first century year into the next event, which is Genesis 7:11, 8, 13 through 14, right, brothers? Which is Noah leaves the ark, right? And here it is. It goes on and on in the book. I won't go no more further, but it will be coming out pretty soon, hopefully. And if y'all, so allow us to release it and get it out to the brothers and sisters. But those who are part of our class, we have given y'all some hard copies of this, and you have taken it into your classes and shared it among your families. But here it is. Every time we drop a video, we're dropping the puzzle pieces. And Yah wanted us to do this today with you all. Just to break out how many have been outdated with time in their decision makings without allowing the scriptures to show you, to point out to you how many have got the times mixed up and don't know they're running out of time. So that was what I wanted to release today, and I will probably be back again. As you know, we're always out of time, but never out of word. We're always going to hit you with the best and not with the rest, because we know Yah is the one that gives us, the confidence of knowing that he's real and he's spiritually connected in a heavy way to all brothers and sisters. So you know what I'm talking about. But I send my love out to all of you. I've been quite busy, and I got a lot of more powerful things that me and the Father will be releasing pretty soon. Just as this, pretty short video that we just released today, Old Testament timeline, and just to give you guys a little, embracing of what we're working on and what we're doing and trying to make possible for everyone. So this book is going to be very deep and heavy, and it's going to basically give a lot of good material to the student and those who basically wanted to actually just gain more information. So until next time, brothers and sisters. Oh, and another thing, we have moved our classes from the free call conference, and we will be actually sending updates to all the brothers and sisters by their phones to what program we will be using. So all of you who have came last Saturday to class or got a memo from your email, you know that we're closing that end of that class to move it. So um, today was a good time to release that information. I almost forgot that was in one of my notes to make known for those who are new or might see something on one of our videos for that class. Just know that we're going to remove that pretty soon. We're getting around to that, and those who know where we are now basically have those links. And for those of you who don't, hit us by email. Let us know who you are and what you're trying to do to get involved, or and then we'll get back in touch with you, or call us by our phone line that we also made available. And here it is. You can leave a message, and therefore we'll hit you right back. And just write down our phone number is 623-455-0548. And therefore somebody will get back with you, either I or my wife, and whatever the concerns might be. So until next time, I am your brother YISRAEL-YE'SHOMBIYAH here at IVI, Intelligent Voices Israelites. And we make our voice known because we are Israelites. Until next time, shalom, shalom, my brothers and sisters.